Ladies and gentlemen, India calling out Trump is not just a moment in international diplomacy. It is a statement of strength, sovereignty, and self-respect on the world stage. This is not about politics as usual. It's about a shift in global power dynamics. For decades, nations like India were expected to stay silent, nod politely, and align themselves with Western interests, even when it conflicted with their values, dignity, or strategic goals. But not anymore. What we witnessed in this moment, India openly confronting Trump's statements or positions, is symbolic of a new India, one that refuses to be patronized, misrepresented, or underestimated. This calling out didn't happen in isolation. It is the result of years of transformation, economic, military, technological, and spiritual. India is no longer waiting to be acknowledged, it is commanding attention. So when Trump, known for his brash style and divisive rhetoric, made remarks that challenged India's position or dignity, the response was clear: India will not stay silent. This wasn't a reaction rooted in hostility, it was a declaration of self-worth. It was India saying, "We are no longer the colony, we are the voice." And the world noticed. It's important to understand that when India speaks, it speaks not only with the voice of a government, but with the spirit of a billion people, many of whom carry the wounds of the past, but also the hope of the future. The power of India's stance came from this collective consciousness, a deep knowing that the time for silence is over. This moment was more than a rebuttal to a political figure. It was a reawakening of a civilization's confidence. And that confidence is rooted not just in economics or politics, but in faith. India's rise is faith-driven. There is a sacred fire burning through the nation, a fire that says we were made for more, a fire that believes in divine justice, that believes when truth is spoken, healing follows. That's why this moment matters, because calling out falsehood, arrogance, or misinformation isn't just about politics. It's a spiritual act of truth-telling. It's what happens when a nation steps into its purpose and refuses to dim its light. Now, while many waited for a response from the military or another leader, like Pakistan's General Asim Munir, the silence or lack of public condolence speaks volumes. It's not always what is said. Sometimes what isn't said reveals more. If there was no statement to condole or support Trump, it could mean that even in traditionally aligned circles, there is growing respect for India's assertiveness. The region is changing, power dynamics are shifting, and leaders are learning that standing for truth, especially against ego-driven narratives, is the only sustainable way forward. India has shown that diplomacy doesn't have to mean compliance, that standing up for yourself is not aggression, it is alignment, and when you align with what is right, the world may be uncomfortable, but the world will listen. This is not just a story of one leader being called out. It is the story of a nation awakening, a nation realizing that the power it seeks from others is already within. It is a reminder that speaking truth, especially to power, is how real change begins. Not just on the international stage, but in every heart, in every home, in every person who has ever been told to stay silent. India called out Trump, and in doing so, it called its own people to rise, to walk in faith, to live in truth, and to believe that when you speak with conviction, heaven listens, the world shifts, and healing begins. India calls out Trump is not just a trending headline. It represents a significant turning point in global geopolitics and power dynamics. It reflects a moment when India, a country historically seen as a silent observer on the world stage, chooses to speak boldly and unapologetically. This isn't just a reaction to a statement by a former U.S. president, it's a larger, more symbolic act, a message to the world that India will no longer allow its position, values, or sovereignty to be questioned or manipulated without response. This is about self-respect. For decades, leaders in the West, including Donald Trump, have approached India from a place of strategic convenience, celebrating its democracy when needed, sidelining its voice when inconvenient. But what's changing now is the tone of India's response. India is no longer a hesitant participant in global affairs. It is a confident, rising power that isn't afraid to confront rhetoric that diminishes its integrity. When Trump made remarks, either directly or indirectly, questioning India's global role, trade policies, or strategic decisions, India didn't turn the other cheek. It stood tall and responded. This boldness resonates deeply with India's national identity, especially under a government that has made it clear India is not to be dictated to, and this moment, this calling out, signifies more than just a defensive reaction. It's a declaration. It tells the world we see through the posturing, we recognize manipulation, and we will not be silent. And in the backdrop of this moment, a question naturally arises. How did others in the region respond? Specifically, what did General Asim Munir, Pakistan's powerful army chief, say? Or not say? Did he condole Trump? Did he align himself with India's assertion, or did he maintain a strategic silence? The lack of public support or condolence from Asim Munir is itself revealing. In a region marked by historical tension, every gesture, or its absence, carries weight. Asim Munir's silence may indicate a calculated pause. Perhaps he saw India's confidence and understood that this was a moment where aligning with the old narrative would no longer serve Pakistan's interests. Or perhaps his silence was a quiet nod, acknowledging that the winds are shifting and that even traditional allies of the U.S. are reconsidering their positions in light of a more assertive India. But beyond military or political analysis, this moment reflects something deeper. It reflects the spiritual awakening of a nation. India is not only rising in economic and technological terms, it is rising in its awareness of divine purpose. The call out to Trump wasn't just political, it was moral. It was India speaking from a place of rooted conviction, shaped by centuries of resilience, faith, and dharma. It reminds us that leadership grounded in truth does not seek validation from world powers. It seeks alignment with what is right. And in this moment, India's refusal to bow down to political pressure, to remain passive, or to accept distortion, shows that the country is reclaiming its narrative. This is why the keyword India calls out Trump is more than a phrase. It's a symbol of a new era, an era where India walks with confidence, speaks with clarity, and stands with purpose. Whether Asim Munir condoles Trump or not becomes secondary in light of India's rising voice. The real story is that the world watched India draw a line, and in doing so, reminded everyone, truth, when spoken with courage, is the loudest force on earth. India vs. Trump political tension is no longer just a side story in international relations. It's a reflection of a changing global order. For years, India maintained a diplomatic, often cautious approach when dealing with U.S. leadership, including Donald Trump. But under the surface, the tension was building. While Trump publicly praised India at times, especially during grand events like Namaste Trump, in Ahmedabad, there was always an undercurrent of transactional diplomacy. Trump's foreign policy often prioritized short-term deals, trade imbalances, and a dominance-based tone, which gradually clashed with India's vision of sovereignty and mutual respect. This tension reached a boiling point when India decided to call out Trump, directly or indirectly, over remarks and actions perceived as disrespectful or misinformed about India's internal matters and foreign policy stance. It wasn't just a political move, it was a powerful assertion of identity. India made it clear that it is no longer willing to be spoken down to by global powers. The age of polite silence is over. What made this moment significant was not just the content of what India said, but the tone. Firm, assertive, unapologetic. It echoed the sentiment of a nation that has outgrown the need for Western validation. India is no longer the observer in global politics. It is becoming the voice. Whether it's about trade, defense, or geopolitics, India now speaks on equal footing. Trump's usual brash style, known to rattle smaller nations or allies into submission, did not work on India. And that, perhaps, is what made this moment so defining. It was a break from the old narrative where Western leaders assumed moral and strategic superiority. Now, enter Asim Munir, the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan. In the backdrop of this rising tension between India and Trump, the silence or ambiguity of figures like Munir is also worth examining. Did he condole Trump? Did he show solidarity with his discomfort or criticism? The absence of a clear response can be interpreted in many ways. It might be strategic neutrality. It might be an unspoken acknowledgement that India's stance has reset the rules of engagement in South Asia. After all, if India can challenge a U.S. president and stand by its values publicly, then regional actors are forced to reassess their own posture. Power equations are shifting. Pakistan has historically aligned more closely with U.S. interests, especially in military and intelligence matters. But even for Pakistan, the global environment is changing. There is no longer one superpower dictating the terms. There are multiple centers of power, and India, with its growing economy, tech leadership, and diplomatic clout, is rapidly becoming one of them. Asim Munir's silence or non-response to the India-Trump episode reflects a deeper recognition that this is India's moment. Even critics and rivals are watching with caution, and perhaps a quiet respect. At the core of this India vs. Trump political tension is not just a diplomatic disagreement, it is a spiritual and psychological shift. India's rise is rooted in a faith-based strength that comes from centuries of endurance, not just strategy. When India calls out a global leader like Trump, it does so not with arrogance, but with a deep sense of rightness. It is the voice of a civilization reclaiming its authority. In the end, this moment isn't just about Trump. It's about what India represents now, a nation unafraid to speak, a people rooted in their identity, a global force no longer defined by others, but by its own vision, and that shift, powered by faith, fueled by resilience, is what truly defines the political tension between India and Trump. It is not a feud. It is a reset. A message that the old world order is fading and a new one, where respect must be mutual, is rising. The Trump controversy involving India represents a significant chapter in the evolving dynamics between the world's oldest democracy and its largest. At the center of this tension is not just a clash of leaders or policies, but a deeper collision between arrogance and assertion, between political spectacle and rising self-respect. When India called out Trump, whether over trade disputes, foreign policy remarks, or his often unpredictable tone, it marked a defining moment. It wasn't just a diplomatic disagreement. It was a public stand against a world that underestimated India's intelligence, strength, and sovereignty. Trump's relationship with India during his presidency was marked by contradictions. On one hand, he participated in massive rallies like Namaste Trump, receiving a warm public welcome. On the other, his administration regularly threatened tariffs, criticized India's defense partnerships, and made tone-deaf remarks about complex regional issues like Kashmir. These inconsistencies sowed quiet resentment within Indian diplomatic circles. It wasn't about disrespect for the U.S. as a nation, but about the realization that Trump's transactional style left no room for dignity. Every alliance was conditional, every friendship measured by financial gain or political leverage. India, a country with a long memory and deep cultural pride, had tolerated these moments for years. But this time it spoke up. The call out wasn't loud or theatrical. It was controlled, clear, and rooted in principle. It reflected a shift in India's diplomatic posture. The age of passivity is over. India is no longer a country that waits to be defined by others. It defines itself. And when Trump crossed a line, Through direct commentary or political misrepresentation, India responded not with aggression, but with unwavering clarity. It was a moment of truth, one that reminded the world that India doesn't bow, even to former superpowers. This controversy sent ripples through the international community. Critics of India, including those in Pakistan, watched with intense interest, and among them, one name surfaced repeatedly: General Asim Munir, Pakistan's army chief. Many speculated whether he would speak up in support of Trump or offer some public condolence. Given Pakistan's historical ties with U.S. military interests. But there was silence. That silence was telling. Whether strategic or cautious, Asim Munir's lack of response was a signal that even traditional allies of American power were taking a step back, evaluating the winds of change. In South Asia, where power is often exercised through soft influence and subtle messaging, such moments matter. The absence of a comment is often louder than a statement. The region saw that even those historically positioned against India weren't rushing to support Trump. Because in this moment, India wasn't just defending its policies, it was asserting a new standard of self-respect for the global South. It was speaking for every country that has ever been patronized, underestimated, or treated as secondary by Western powers. This is where the spiritual and emotional core of the controversy begins to surface. India's call-out wasn't just political, it was moral. It was as if a sleeping lion had awoken not to attack, but to declare that it sees clearly now, that its strength is divine, not dependent, that it walks not behind the world, but beside it, equal, rooted, and unshaken. Trump's controversy with India revealed something profound. A global leader tried to apply pressure in the old way, and it didn't work. The result wasn't submission, it was a reset, a reminder that the language of fear, dominance, or financial leverage no longer applies to countries like India. It also reminded people around the world that true power doesn't roar, it stands. It speaks with truth, not threat. In the end, this controversy may fade from headlines, but its meaning will linger. India has shown that no matter how powerful the person, when words cross into disrespect, they will be met with dignity, not silence. And in that response lies a lesson not just for Trump, but for the world. In a time when global narratives are rapidly shifting, every word and silence from military and political leaders carries weight. This is especially true when looking at the evolving dynamics between India, the United States, and Pakistan. The topic Asim Munir reaction news becomes especially intriguing in the context of the incident where India boldly called out Donald Trump, creating waves not just in diplomatic circles but across the South Asian region. Asim Munir, the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan, is known for his calculated moves, reserved tone, and firm command over the country's military and strategic posture. So naturally, the world watched and waited for his reaction. Did he condole Trump? Did he offer support, or did his silence speak louder than words? The fact is, there was no loud or obvious statement from General Asim Munir in the aftermath of India's bold stance against Trump. And that in itself is news. In the delicate chess game of South Asian geopolitics, where every expression is dissected for meaning, a lack of response can be a strategic masterstroke or a subtle show of respect. Asim Munir, who carries the heavy legacy of Pakistan's military diplomacy, knows that words, when unnecessary, can be dangerous. His non-reaction may have been a deliberate choice, a signal to the world that Pakistan was not eager to insert itself into a controversy where India had already taken a strong and sovereign stand. Why does this matter? Because traditionally, Pakistan has aligned itself with American military and intelligence frameworks, and its leadership has often issued statements reinforcing that bond, especially when U.S. leaders come under scrutiny. But this time, Munir chose restraint. Some analysts suggest that his silence reflects a deeper realization. The world is watching India differently now. No longer seen as a secondary voice, India is positioning itself as a global power with the courage to challenge even the loudest voices in Western politics. For Asim Munir to rush to Trump's defense or to try and downplay India's stand could have appeared desperate or outdated. Moreover, Munir's silence reflects the current complexity in Pakistan-U.S. relations as well. Pakistan is not the favored partner it once was, especially with shifting priorities in Washington. At the same time, Asim Munir is carefully navigating Pakistan's internal challenges, economic pressure, political instability, and a growing need to stabilize regional ties. Making a statement in support of Trump against India, especially when the world seemed to lean in to hear India's voice, would have undermined Pakistan's attempt to rebuild its image as a responsible, calculated actor. What we must also understand is the deeply rooted power of silence in diplomacy and military strategy. Asim Munir, trained in intelligence and strategy, understands this better than most. By not issuing a public reaction or condolence, he may have acknowledged India's growing influence, silently admitting that this is a moment when India is leading the narrative. His lack of engagement allowed the spotlight to remain on India's assertion and Trump's discomfort. In that silence, there was wisdom. This event marks a shift not just in political communication, but in symbolic power. The absence of a reaction from Pakistan's most powerful man shows that sometimes, when one nation rises to speak truth to power, others must simply watch. It reveals the recalibration happening across South Asia. Power is not just about military strength or economic alliances. It's about moral clarity, timing, and spiritual backbone. India's courage to call out Trump sent a ripple that forced even its regional rivals to pause. Asim Munir's quiet response reflects a recognition of that shift, and for those tuned into the rhythms of regional diplomacy, that was the real headline. The reaction didn't need a press conference. It was written in the silence, a silence that said, the balance of power is changing, and everyone knows it. India's global power stance has undergone a remarkable transformation over the past decade, evolving from a measured diplomatic player into a confident, assertive voice in global politics. This transformation was unmistakably evident in the recent incident where India publicly called out Donald Trump, a bold and calculated move that sent a powerful message not only to the United States but to the rest of the world. India will no longer tolerate political rhetoric that undermines its dignity, sovereignty, or strategic choices. This moment was not a flash of defiance. It was the natural outcome of a nation stepping fully into its global power. For too long, India was perceived as a balancing power, silent, cautious, playing the long diplomatic game without ever taking bold positions. But today's India is different. Its foreign policy is no longer dictated by appeasement or fear of upsetting the global superpowers. Instead, it is driven by clarity of purpose, rooted in national pride and a deep belief that India's civilizational values, democratic model, and strategic position entitle it to speak not just for itself, but for a rising global South. When Trump made comments or adopted postures that crossed the line, whether on trade, security, or internal Indian affairs, India didn't blink. It responded, calmly, confidently, and with the full weight of a global power asserting its voice. This is India's new stance. It is not aggressive, but it is uncompromising. It does not seek conflict, but it does not fear confrontation, especially not when the cause is self-respect. Calling out a former U.S. president was not about political showmanship. It was about making it clear that India is not a subordinate on the world stage. It will not be spoken to in a tone of condescension. It will not allow its actions to be misrepresented without consequence. And when it stands up, it stands tall, not just for optics, but because it has earned that place. India's global power stance is built on multiple pillars. Economically, it is among the fastest growing major economies with a massive domestic market, a young population, and a thriving innovation sector. Militarily, it is modernizing rapidly with strategic partnerships, indigenous defense capabilities, and a powerful deterrent. Diplomatically, it leads dialogues on climate, counterterrorism, technology, and equitable global governance. Spiritually and culturally, it brings a unique voice to the global table, one that speaks of non-violence, resilience, and dharma. These are not abstract ideas. They shape the way India engages with the world. The silence of Pakistan's General Asim Munir in response to this episode is equally revealing. In the past, a confrontation between India and a U.S. leader might have been seen as an opportunity for Pakistan to assert itself or align publicly with American discomfort. But Munir's decision not to speak out or show support for Trump indicates a growing awareness of India's position. The rules of the region are changing. India's confidence on the global stage is being recognized, even by its rivals. This entire event is symbolic of something deeper. The world is no longer bipolar. It is multipolar, and India is a pole. When it calls out a global figure like Trump, it is not reacting impulsively. It is exercising power, not soft power, not passive influence, but real, strategic, faith-driven power that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. This is not about nationalism, it's about alignment with truth, with respect, and with destiny. The world is watching India differently now, not as a developing country asking for space, but as a rising power taking space. And in doing so, it's inspiring millions across the globe. People and nations who have been sidelined, silenced, or told to wait their turn. India is not waiting anymore. It is speaking. It is rising. And in moments like this, it reminds the world that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to be silent. Trump criticized by India. These 4 words mark a shift in global diplomatic tone and power perception. For decades, the United States stood at the center of international politics, often critiquing other nations from a perceived moral high ground. Rarely did countries from the global south, particularly those with strong economic or military dependencies on the U.S., push back with confidence. But when India publicly criticized Donald Trump, it wasn't just an exchange of political disagreement. It was a moment of awakening. A rising power had chosen to speak with clarity, not caution, and the world took notice. Trump's tenure as U.S. president was filled with controversial statements, unpredictable policy swings, and a style of communication that often disrupted diplomatic norms. While some nations adjusted to his impulsive rhetoric with strategic silence, India chose not to be one of them. When Trump made statements that touched on India's sovereignty, its handling of internal matters, or its strategic decisions in South Asia, India didn't look the other way. It responded. This was not about petty political tit-for-tat. This was about maintaining dignity in the global arena, something India is no longer willing to compromise. The criticism from India didn't come in the form of anger or insult. It came from a position of maturity. Through official channels and diplomatic messaging, India made it clear that it would not tolerate being spoken to or about in ways that misrepresented its values, goals, or position on the world stage. This wasn't just a rebuke to Trump the man. It was a challenge to the old world order where powerful Western leaders could criticize and expect silence in return. India shattered that expectation. What's especially powerful about this moment is the spiritual undercurrent behind it. India's voice didn't just carry political weight. It carried the weight of ancient resilience, of a nation rooted in centuries of wisdom and inner strength. Speak the word, Lord, could very well be the emotional anthem of this movement. Because in choosing to speak, India wasn't acting from pride. It was acting from divine authority. It was a voice born not from ego, but from a deep sense of alignment with truth. Now consider the broader regional response. As the India-Trump friction gained global attention, all eyes turned to Pakistan's military leadership, particularly General Asim Munir. Would he seize the moment to support Trump? Would he publicly condone the criticism aimed at India or show solidarity with America's former leader? Interestingly, the response was silence, and that silence said everything. Asim Munir, known for his precision and restraint, chose not to react. Whether it was a strategic decision or a quiet acknowledgement of India's growing global stature, his silence reinforced the significance of India's stand. Even Pakistan, often in ideological and geopolitical tension with India, chose to observe rather than oppose. This silence from Pakistan's top general adds layers to India's criticism of Trump. It wasn't just a bilateral matter anymore. It was a regional event. It showed that India's voice now echoes far beyond its borders, and that echo carries the force of a nation no longer content with being patronized. Ultimately, Trump being criticized by India isn't just a headline, it's a symbol of transformation. It shows the world that respect must be mutual, that no nation, regardless of power, has the license to diminish another without response. It marks the beginning of a new diplomatic tone, one where faith-driven nations like India lead not just with economy or military, but with moral clarity. India's criticism of Trump was not reactive, it was redemptive. It reminded the world, and perhaps Trump himself, that every word spoken from a position of pride will eventually meet a people whose truth cannot be shaken. And in that moment, the voice of India rang clear, strong, and full of divine power. India-Pakistan military diplomacy has always been a delicate and high-stakes game, but in recent years, the dynamics have begun to shift in remarkable ways. The recent global controversy, where India publicly called out Donald Trump, and the question arose whether Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, General Asim Munir, condoned or reacted to the situation, further reveals the subtle layers of military diplomacy unfolding in South Asia. This incident is not just about Trump or diplomatic statements. It's a lens into how India and Pakistan use silence, voice, and presence as weapons in the theater of international influence. Traditionally, military diplomacy between India and Pakistan has been defined by confrontation, border standoffs, proxy conflicts, and decades of mistrust. But in today's world, especially in the eyes of global media, diplomacy has evolved. It now involves optics, statements, international alliances, and strategic restraint. And both India and Pakistan, in their own ways, are adapting to this new stage. When India took a bold stand by calling out Trump's remarks or political behavior, it didn't do so in isolation. It did so with a clear understanding of its growing global stature. India's military diplomacy today is no longer about simply defending its borders. It's about asserting its influence in global discourse. When the world listens, India speaks not only for its own interests, but as a representative of emerging powers. This is especially significant in the context of its relationship with Pakistan, where any diplomatic action by India is closely watched and often mirrored with caution or rivalry. So, when India made its voice heard on a global platform, challenging the tone and implications of Trump's rhetoric, the spotlight naturally shifted to Pakistan. Many expected a reaction from Asim Munir, perhaps a statement of alignment with Trump or criticism of India's assertiveness. But what followed was something far more strategic: silence. And in military diplomacy, silence is not weakness. It is often a calculated decision that speaks volumes. Asim Munir's lack of a public condolence or statement is significant. It may reflect Pakistan's internal recalibration, an acknowledgement that India's global voice is becoming too large to ignore. Or it may signal that Pakistan is watching, measuring, and perhaps even adjusting its traditional approach to military diplomacy in the face of India's assertive rise. In the past, Pakistan may have reacted swiftly and vocally to such moves, but this time, the silence seemed to indicate respect, caution, or perhaps the recognition that the geopolitical winds are changing. The deeper reality is that military diplomacy between India and Pakistan is no longer fought just in border skirmishes. It's unfolding in global forums, media narratives, and strategic alignments. India's defense establishment is increasingly engaging with Western powers, forming military, industrial alliances, and securing technological advantages. Meanwhile, Pakistan's military, long reliant on U.S. support, is facing a need to diversify its alliances while maintaining relevance in a world where India's economic and strategic clout is surging. This new form of diplomacy also includes messaging through media, policy, and public speech. When India calls out a global leader, it isn't just making a political statement, it's demonstrating its military, backed diplomatic confidence. And when Pakistan's military leadership chooses to remain silent, it's not necessarily avoidance. It might be recognition that this moment belongs to India, that reacting too quickly may cost more than it gains. The India-Pakistan military relationship is, at its core, about influence. And in this particular episode involving Trump, the influence was with India. It showed that military diplomacy is now about more than defense. It's about global perception, timing, and moral clarity. And in this evolving game, India is not only playing, it's leading.